What if we've been thinking about going solar all wrong? When you hear going solar, you're probably picturing some guy on your roof installing solar panels, which makes sense. Most of us have hundreds of square feet of otherwise unused roof space. But it got me thinking, what if you live in a condo or high-rise? The business case for solar kind of falls apart. Here's why. The average single-family home in the U.S. is roughly 2,300 square feet. Using the following assumptions and accounting for roof orientation and shading, that means roughly 600 to 1,200 feet of usable roof space, or between 28 and 56 solar panels, good for between 10 and 20 kilowatt hours of solar generation. So that means the average home can produce roughly 4 kilowatts of solar energy per person living there. That's pretty great. But how do things change if you live in a high-rise? Over the past 30 years, something interesting has happened. In the 90s, the average apartment building was 3 stories tall. That rose to 4 stories in the 2000s and now is 6 stories tall today. The taller a building gets, the ratio of roof area per person makes rooftop solar a non-starter. But taller buildings also mean more surface area on the walls, which is exactly what Mitrex aims to capitalize on with their Building Integrated Photovoltaic technology.
So what's the answer then for people who live in high-density areas? Well, turns out I have a huge thank you to Mitrex for inviting me out here to lovely Toronto, Ontario, Canada. It's a little cold out, but the sun is popping out. Where here they build what's called Building Integrated Photovoltaics. For example, these pillars behind me are actually solar panels. They are part of their Building Integrated Solar Panel system. And all of this, all the way to the top, is actually producing electricity. Isn't that crazy? What's really interesting about this is it shows you the kinds of architectural choices that you can have. You don't have to have big walls. Even small cuts and things like this are able to be achieved by having their custom ability to cut pieces of this paneling to various sizes. So as the sun hits those panels up there, it's producing energy. And I think you probably get where this is going and why this could be huge for the future of high-density urban areas and renewable energy.
We are pretty much vertically integrated. So we bring raw material and we create finished products. We start from aluminum, glass, basic raw materials that you can get, and then we develop and create all these products.
Most of our current buildings weren't designed with energy efficiency in mind, so things like solar panels have been retrofitted onto existing designs. BIPV technology weaves solar technology into the very fabric of the buildings themselves, serving as both the outer layer of the structure while generating electricity for either on-site or grid integration. They can be integrated into different building structures like precast, aluminum, bricks, or wood. And the best part is, on the outside, it looks like any other typical building material. What makes Mitrex so unique is their proprietary coating technology, which makes their panels look like marble or any other siding material, but behind it, produce solar energy.
But what you're looking at here is basically different colors and patterns that you're producing or testing or just looking at it.
So you're telling me that is a solar producing panel?
That is a solar producing panel.
Look at that.
When we go to events, we started to go to events just recently, we had to put a sticker on them so people, they don't confuse it with a marble.
Right,
or
they don't go knocking.
Yeah, they don't think it's for a kitchen countertop. If you look really closely, you can see the solar.
That's amazing. This outer layer can be whatever the customer wants.
Yes.
How hard is that to, in terms of like the logistics and the complexity of output, how big of and how do you handle that?
That's one of our kind of challenges we have to overcome. And right now, within 2 weeks, we can come up with a new color. As we receive a request, then we come up with a new color within 2 weeks. But we still have to go through a lot of try and error, R&D, to figure out the best color versus the look.
If I have a requirement, I want exactly this look, you could deliver on that exact look?
That's right, yeah.
Do you have do you need a minimum order size to make it look like financially?
Yeah, like minimum number of pieces we are looking at is 1,000 pieces per order.
Okay.
If it's less than that, it becomes a mock-up.
Yeah.
It's not a project.
Yeah.
Different colors have different effects on the light. Obviously, you want to stay away from any black pigmentation and use really the fact that the cells and the back sheet and everything like that already has a black pigmentation in it. On the other hand, anytime you have white color, you can put as much as you want because when you're putting it, it still looks good, but it still has enough power going through. You would never think that this is a solar module, right? No. So let's pull this one a little bit. So both of these are modules that have solar cells fully functioning. This has more, without going to the details of how we're making the pattern, but this one has more white than that one because we were trying to match that shade. So this one has slightly less power than that one.
You can have a priority that is more on the visual side or
Correct.
the production side.
Correct.
And you have that choice. You
Yeah.
can say, look, I want it to, whatever production I get, I'll take it, but I want it to be purely white or
Exactly.
that
Exactly.
I want to make more power.
So, when I'm doing my tests and like making sure about the power loss I'm getting, I get very excited. I'm like, we are capable of making something very aesthetically pleasing and only a small amount of power loss. I don't know if you saw our fins on the outside. Those are fully active modules that are white, that have enough power, yet they are aesthetically pleasing. And that's really what I realized in this world. If you want to sell something to the mass, you want it to be aesthetically pleasing so that it will be sold and put on those facades that we want, but in the same time it has enough power. Obviously, it's not exactly the same as a module that has no sort of aesthetic coverage on it, but it's so close and yet aesthetically pleasing. So this is one of the nicer marble looking modules that I personally like. If you know regular modules, they have silver ribbons, right? So we hide that and we optimize the amount that is hidden so that we don't overhide and then we don't want to cover the cell. We just want to cover the string itself.
Right now, Mitrex has 3 facades on their headquarters that are out on display. The first is the front column fins, then there's the west wall, and finally the top brick section.
The west wall is one of my earlier projects that I'm happy and excited about when I see it. It's very fulfilling when there's something that you were working on for a while and then you're like so in the zone and then all of a sudden you see it out there. For me, it's very exciting to see it.
That never gets old. I love that too. I can hear you.
A 22 square foot 72 cell installation can generate up to 380 watts. According to the company, a typical 30-story building using Mitrex's products can generate enough solar energy to power 48 homes per year, which would be the same thing as taking 61 cars off the road. But the company is more than just cheap talk. Their first product will be their own headquarters in Toronto, where they will be employing a system capable of generating over 600 kilowatts to power their own production line.
I think the main point here is this is a building built in after the World War, and now we are recladding it, making it look new, and getting electricity out of it.
Yeah.
So now you might be asking, how does BIPV technology compare with traditional building materials and current solar technology? And like all emerging technology, there's always going to be a trade-off.
So let's say the traditional one is 20% to 22%. Ours could be 18 to 20%.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a very, very minimal.
That's a trade-off. But
that's
we are
very
comparing
small.
with something that's zero.
Right.
So we compare ourselves with concrete or aluminum, which is zero. So we are 18%, 20% ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the thought of having a layer that gives you the visual that you want and you're only losing a couple of percent, I thought it'd be lower than that.
Well, it took us a couple of years to get there. We used to be much lower.
That's cool.
Their line of products cover a surprisingly wide range of use cases. Unlike your house, which probably has an exterior made out of stucco or siding, usually wood, larger buildings have cladding. Mid-rise and high-rise buildings, like these, have more code requirements for things like fire protection.
When the panels they arrive here, now they are already being laid up. They're ready for the final lamination, and then they go for a junction box and connection. So they basically go and encapsulate the solar cells between 2 layers, so the oxygen and the water cannot get to them. So the biggest enemy of solar cells is oxygen, water, and nature.
Right.
We have to keep them away from them. So the glass is protecting the solar cells. But the good thing is the glass is also protecting the building. So it's a dual purpose.
For their cladding products and their roof products, they use traditional monocrystalline cells that are very efficient. But they even have glass window products that can produce solar by using thin film.
Our preference is to use silicon because it's cheaper, it's more efficient, and it's easier to use than thin film at the moment. But there are some applications for thin film, and it's based on the limitations of silicon, where the cell size is pretty fixed. you're fixed to this square, this blue rectangle, where the thin film can be done in little strips. And these little strips, you can change the density of the strips, the spacing between the strips to create a transparent effect. There are thin films that reach up to 22%. So if you imagine that you want a 50% transparent window, you're getting close to 10%. It always depends on how transparent you want this to be.
So the more layers of thin film you have, the darker the window shading will be, but the more electricity you can produce. So if you've ever seen huge skyscrapers seemingly built out of glass, well, even those can produce solar power. Again, this technology is called Building Integrated Photovoltaic, which means we shouldn't be thinking about generating electricity as an afterthought, but instead at the core of the design of the building. This could mean intentionally designing building structures to be better optimized for capturing sunlight. And that's where the technology has the potential to be a real game changer. While it can certainly be retrofitted onto existing buildings, it's really about looking into the future with a mindset of energy efficiency from the very beginning. And then there's the question of cost. Installing solar on a house is a tough proposition because you're asking a homeowner with a mortgage to spend tens of thousands of dollars on additional stuff. But in larger buildings, the economics change because unlike stucco or siding for a house, the cladding that you see is actually already pretty expensive. So Mitrex believes their products can be built and sold for comparable prices, maybe a little bit more expensive, but at cost that they can recoup in just 2 years with energy production.
It's not just the sides of buildings, it's everything. Things like walkways and bridges. And here's another example of the company Claddify's cladding around this bridge. And that could, in the future, all be solar producing.
Mitrex even has a roof product, more like the solar panels you're thinking of. But they can actually match your roof material. So if you have a slate roof or asphalt shingle, metal, whatever the case might be, you can send them what you would like and they can make their panels look just like your roof. But the installation is still the same as a typical panel. So that's another option that they provide. Also, one other final use case that I find really interesting is if you've ever seen this, this is a wall that is built on freeways to keep all that freeway noise out of residential neighborhoods. And currently, they're just dumb. They don't actually do anything.
As part of our research and development, we are constantly developing new products. This is our highway noise barrier. They look just like traditional, solar panels, but they are actually embedded into a noise barrier system for highways.
How does that work?
That's the secret sauce of creating a glass that's absorbing the sound and the sunlight at the same time.
So if all this is sounding pretty awesome, yeah, that's why we wanted to make this video. But it's not all roses and rainbows. There are some challenges for sure. First of all, they have to reach scale of production, which is always a challenge. But also, there's the issue of the angle that the sunlight is coming in at. Understanding solar generation as a function of the location of the sun requires talking about flux. The equation for electric flux is as follows, which means when the sun is directly perpendicular to the panels, you'll get 100% output, theoretically. This would be like having a rooftop solar panel at high noon in the summer somewhere along the equator. But having solar cladding on the sides of buildings changes some things. If you live in the northern hemisphere, having solar on the south-facing part of your building is an obvious choice. But east and west could make sense too, especially west. And that's because typically when the sun is setting, that's when energy prices tend to go up. And even if you have shading and other things, you're still going to be producing electricity.
Here's the thing. If it's costing me $100 per square foot to put a panel on the south or the north, and it's comparable to other materials, even 50% is better than zero.
So that there's no difference in price.
If the price difference is the same or is so close, I would not see the difference. So a lot of our customers, they ask, can we just do 3 sides? And when we give them the proposal for each side separately, they end up saying, yeah, it makes sense. Let's just do the whole thing. Because in a package, it still makes sense.
Having a building that produces a lot of solar power can be quite lucrative, especially if you could sell excess power or charge electric vehicles in your garages. It could just be a big time incentive for both the builders and also for the occupants and tenants that move into these buildings. But the cool thing is that the incentives don't just stop for the builders. Any company that moves into a building with BIPV can claim that they're carbon neutral without having to do any extra work. There's going to be a lot of incentives both now and especially in the future. So having future buildings built with BIPV is going to be a no-brainer if it isn't already one today. So that is a look at BIPV, Building Integrated Photovoltaics. You know how much I love solar panels, and I've always thought, what can we do about urban city centers and high-rise buildings? And I think we might finally have our answer. But what do you think? Are you excited about BIPV solar? Do you think it's the future of urban, higher density city centers? We'd love to hear from you in the comments below.